What if the energy landscape we think we know is just, well, the tip of the iceberg?
Hmm.
Imagine vast reservoirs of oil and gas, not where we usually look, but locked away deep inside solid granite formations.
Yeah, it sounds almost like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does, like
Yeah.
a plot twist in our global energy story.
Well, it certainly feels like one. And what we're digging into today isn't fiction. It's actually a series of um, concrete proposals aiming to tap this very resource.
In granite, seriously.
Seriously. And in some pretty globally significant spots, too.
Okay, let's dive right in then. We're looking at the potential for oil and gas from granite in Ukraine's Rava-Ruska region and also the Siberian Plateau in Russia.
That's right.
And there's another layer here too, isn't there? Something about potential involvement from companies in the Philippines.
Precisely. Adding another twist, we've got these letters from a developer, Vadim Chernov, who's behind a technology called RALF1.
RALF1. Okay.
And he's pitching partnerships to major Chinese energy players, Jiangsu, Linyang Energy, and CNPC. And alongside those letters, we're looking at reports that analyze which Philippine firms might actually be suitable partners for these, well, pretty ambitious projects.
Got it. So our mission for you today, if you stick with us, is to unpack this whole thing. Understand the potential of these granite oil ventures, figure out where Philippine companies might fit, and sort of grasp the bigger geopolitical currents swirling around it all.
Exactly. And the absolute key to all of this is that technology I mentioned, RALF1, developed by Chernov.
Right. RNLF1. So what's the basic idea? Why granite? Why is that suddenly on the radar? We usually think of oil in, softer rocks.
Yeah, traditionally it's porous sedimentary rocks. That's where oil and gas accumulate. Chernov's idea, though, it targets the fracture networks, the tiny potential pockets within granite.
Inside the granite itself.
His RALF1 tech supposedly uses some kind of novel method to, let's say, enhance these natural pathways that allows extraction of hydrocarbons that would otherwise just stay trapped in there.
Okay, so what kind of potential are we talking? Let's start with Ukraine, Rava-Ruska.
Well, for Rava-Ruska, Chernov's estimates are pretty staggering. He puts recoverable oil at 7.3 billion barrels over 10 years.
7.3 billion.
Billion. With a potential net profit he claims could exceed $213 billion. He even talks about a possible daily production rate of 2 million barrels from just 200 wells.
2 million barrels a day from granite. That's a very bold claim.
It is very bold.
What about Siberia? Is the scale comparable?
The Siberian numbers are, if anything, even more eye-watering. Within the top, say, 6 kilometers of the plateau, Chernov estimates 1.86 billion barrels initially.
Okay, still huge.
But then he theorizes that RALF1 could potentially unlock something like 117.42 billion barrels. His phrasing is, by theoretically changing past geological conditions.
Wow. 117 billion barrels. What's that worth?
That translates potentially to upwards of $9 trillion.
$9 trillion locked in granite. Okay, that sounds revolutionary, clearly. But, it makes you wonder, why haven't these projects happened already? Especially the Ukraine one. What's the holdup?
Yeah, that's the key question. According to Chernov himself, there's been a combination of really negative factors hitting the Rava-Ruska project.
What specifically?
He points to the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war, obviously.
Right, major instability.
Also, widespread corruption within Ukraine, and interestingly, his own imprisonment. He views these as the major roadblocks.
His imprisonment, okay.
He argues that these issues haven't just cost Ukraine massive potential revenue, but they've also kind of indirectly helped Russia by keeping Ukraine dependent on outside energy. He also claims huge personal losses, billions, because of it all.
So facing those setbacks, he's now looking east towards China for partners.
Precisely. That seems to be the strategy now. He's actively reaching out to two big Chinese energy companies.
Jiangsu, Linyang Energy, and CNPC, you said.
That's them. Jiangsu Linyang has its European base in Warsaw, which is strategically interesting. And then there's the giant China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC.
Okay, let's start with Jiangsu Linyang. I know them more for smart grids, energy storage. Oil extraction seems a bit different for them. What's the logic?
Well, that's what's interesting. It could be about building a more integrated energy strategy. Chernov suggests the natural gas from these granite formations could actually feed into Linyang's energy storage tech.
Ah, synergy.
Exactly. In Europe, maybe Asia too, a potential alternative to Russian gas, perhaps. Yeah. He also talks about alignment between RALF1's precision and Linyang's smart grid management.
Makes sense.
And the economics, as we said, are potentially huge. Plus, that Warsaw headquarters, That's a key logistical point for Rava-Ruska.
Right near the border?
And their existing connections, say with CNPC, might smooth the path for getting involved in Siberia too, maybe even tying into things like the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. It could really position Linyang differently in the energy game.
It does sound strategically coherent, leveraging different parts of their business. What about CNPC then? They're already a global energy giant. What's the appeal of granite oil for them?
For CNPC, it's fundamentally about accessing potentially vast new types of reserves.
Yeah.
Unconventional granite oil,
Diversification.
right, could give them a big long-term competitive edge. It also helps solidify their position inside Russia, especially in resource-heavy areas like the Arctic.
Where they already have projects.
Exactly. They've got existing infrastructure, pipelines, experience with the Northern Sea Route.
Yeah.
So Siberia is somewhat familiar territory logistically, even if the geology is new. The potential returns are massive, and it broadens their resource base beyond the usual sedimentary stuff.
Okay, so we have this potentially disruptive tech, huge projects proposed in Ukraine and Siberia, and two major Chinese firms considering it. Now let's weave in the Philippines. How could their companies realistically play a part in something like Siberian granite exploration? That seems like a huge leap.
It does, and that's where our analysis of potential Philippine partners for the Siberian project comes in, specifically working alongside Jiangsu Linyang. The report flags a few key companies that might bring something specific to the table.
All right, lay them out for us. Who looks like a frontrunner?
Well, top of the list seems to be PNOC Exploration Corporation, PNOC EC.
State-owned company.
That's the one. They're the oil and gas arm of the Philippine government. They do have experience with complex projects, deep water stuff like the Malapaya gas field.
Malampaya, right. Major domestic source.
And they've worked internationally before with big players like Shell, Chevron, their state backing. That could offer some, diplomatic weight, especially given the Philippines' sort of neutral stance on the Ukraine war. Maybe China could act as an intermediary.
So technical experience, government links, what are the downsides? The challenges for PNRC-EC getting involved way up in Siberia.
The big hurdles are, well, they have zero operational presence in Russia or Poland currently. And their history is really focused on Philippine domestic basins, sedimentary ones.
Completely different environment.
Totally. Going into Siberia would need huge logistical support, massive financial backing. It really makes a strong three-way partnership with a well-funded Chinese partner like Jiangsu Linyang almost essential.
Makes sense. Who else is considered a possibility from the Philippines?
Another strong contender mentioned is actually a pair. PXP Energy Corporation and its a subsidiary Forum Energy, which is listed in the UK.
PSP and Forum. Okay. What's their angle?
They have some prior experience dealing with Chinese energy firms, specifically CNOOC, mostly in the context of the South China Sea disputes, mind you.
Right. That complex relationship.
And Forum Energy, being UK listed, could maybe offer a European entry point, though that could also get complicated given geopolitics.
That CNOOC connection seems potentially valuable, though. What are their pros and cons for Siberia?
The established link to a major Chinese player like CNOOC is definitely a plus. On the other hand, PXP's activities in the South China Sea have faced, delays and issues due to those tensions.
Resources stretched, maybe?
Possibly. And neither PXP nor Forum has direct experience with Arctic conditions or, crucially, granite oil exploration. Forum's UK base, while maybe useful in Europe, could also complicate things with Russia because of sanctions, although, again, the Philippines' neutrality might help there.
Tricky. Okay, and there was a third Philippine company mentioned.
Yes, the Philidrill Corporation.
Philidrill. What's their story?
They're more of a smaller-scale producer within the Philippines. They operate fields like Galak. Their leadership team does have some international business background.
So a smaller player, what kind of role could they realistically have in a massive Siberian project?
Philidrill's contribution would likely be more around specific technical know-how from their existing operations. But yeah, their overall scale is quite modest. Limited financial clout compared to the others.
Right.
And they don't have much history of big international expansion or specific granite expertise. So the analysis suggests they might fit into a more specialized, perhaps technical role within a larger group.
With Jiangsu Linyang definitely needing to lead on the big stuff like funding and logistics if any Philippine company joins in Siberia.
Pretty much, yes. That seems the most likely scenario.
Okay, let's pivot then. What about the Rava-Ruska project in Ukraine? Are we looking at the same set of potential Philippine partners for Chinese companies interested there? We know Jiangsu Linyang has that Warsaw base, which seems relevant.
You're right. The Warsaw base is key. And yes, while no Philippine energy company is currently operating directly in Poland, the same main candidates we just discussed for Siberia are seen as plausible partners for Chinese firms like Jiangsu Linyang or maybe even CNOOC in the Ravaruska context as well.
So PNOC, EC, PXP Forum, Philidril, they're all potentially in the mix for Ukraine too. How would that work?
Well, take PNOC-EC. They do have that history of joint ventures with Chinese firms, like the JMSU agreement in the past.
Right, the seismic survey deal.
And their experience in deep water and onshore exploration does have some overlap with the kind of challenges granite might present. So they're viable. But it would absolutely depend on getting solid geopolitical and logistical support sorted out, probably using that Warsaw connection through Jiangsu Linyang.
What about PXP Energy? You mentioned their experience navigating tricky situations like the South China Sea. Could that be relevant in Ukraine's, highly charged environment?
That's a really good point. PXP's experience negotiating in disputed areas, their talks with CNOOC, that could offer valuable perspective for handling the sensitivities around a Ukrainian project.
But they'd need to set up shop in Poland?
Yes, expanding to Poland would mean significant investment, but again, Jiangsu Linyang's existing setup in Warsaw could potentially make that easier, facilitate it somehow.
And Forum Energy, does the UK listing help or hinder in the Ukraine context?
It's a bit of both, potentially. The UK listing plus their CNOC links still makes them a possible partner. It offers that European connection. But like PXP, they need to establish a real presence or a very strong working arrangement in Poland to be directly involved in Ravaruska.
So the bottom line is no current presence, but the expertise and the China connections make these companies plausible candidates.
Exactly. Plausible partners. PNOC, EC, state backing is a factor, and Forum's European ties are maybe strategically interesting, but it all hinges on partnership.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit now. We need to consider the bigger picture. What are the key background factors? The Philippine energy situation, the geopolitics. What do you need to keep in mind when looking at these potential deals?
There are several really crucial layers. First, the Philippines' own energy sector. It's significantly underexplored, and they rely heavily on imports.
Right. Energy security is a big issue.
It is. And their focus has always been domestic basins or the South China Sea, not really the Arctic or unconventional stuff like granite. Plus, a huge factor is the Malampaya gas field of their main domestic source is running down.
Nearing depletion, so the pressure's on to find new sources.
Intense pressure. That's the domestic context.
And then there's the war, the Russo-Ukrainian war, as of mid-2025. That obviously hangs heavy over the Ravaruska project, but what about the wider impact?
Oh, it has profound effects everywhere. Russia's faced major economic hits. Western sanctions have cut off a lot of traditional investment in its energy sector.
Making China a much more important partner for them.
Hugely important. You see with projects like Power of Siberia, too. Now, the Philippines' neutral stance in the conflict could be an advantage, allowing them to potentially work with partners involved in both Russia and Ukraine, maybe via China.
But the risk?
The instability is undeniable. Operating even indirectly near a war zone, like in Poland for the Ravaruska project, carries massive risks.
And what about the Philippines-China relationship itself? Those South China Sea tensions are always there. How does that play into potential energy partnerships elsewhere?
It's definitely a complex relationship, multifaceted. You have the maritime disputes, yes, but there's also a history of economic cooperation, even some energy cooperation like that JMSU deal years ago.
So it's not impossible.
It suggests that despite the political friction, collaboration on commercial projects in other regions, like Siberia or even Ukraine, is possible, as long as they're structured carefully to avoid getting tangled up in the sovereignty disputes.
There's also this push within the Philippines for more homegrown energy exploration, right? Finding their own resources. How do these potential ventures in Siberia and Ukraine fit with that? Or do they conflict?
That's a key tension. The drive for indigenous exploration is strong, but honestly, the track record hasn't been great beyond Palawan, and deep water exploration is incredibly expensive.
So Siberia and Ukraine look potentially more rewarding.
Potentially much higher reward, yes. But also, as we've said, incredibly high risk. For Philippine companies, given their likely capital limits and lack of specific Arctic or granite experience, partnering up, especially in a three-way deal with a big Chinese player, seems the most realistic way in.
But that comes with its own set of strings attached.
Absolutely. It could lead to greater geopolitical entanglement and dependence. It's a definite trade-off.
We've talked a lot about the why for the Chinese and Philippine companies. But what about Chernoff himself? What exactly did he propose in those letters to Jiangsu Linyang and CNPC? What was his actual pitch?
His proposals lay out a pretty clear vision. To Jiangsu Linyang, he pitched a broad partnership covering both Ravaruska and Siberia. And he specifically suggested that tripartite model for Siberia, bringing in Philippine companies.
Okay, both projects for them. And for CNPC.
His proposal to CNPC was focused just on the Siberian project.
And what's he bringing to the table in return for their involvement? What's the offer?
His main offer is his proprietary RALLF1 technology and his personal expertise in using it. That's his core asset.
Any needs?
He's seeking substantial funding, obviously. Money for the projects themselves, for building infrastructure, for logistical support, and importantly, access to established energy markets to sell whatever they produce.
Did he put any numbers on the funding needed?
He did. He gave some pretty hefty estimates. For Ravaruska, something like $3 billion for drilling and another $5 billion for infrastructure.
$8 billion total for Ukraine.
Roughly. And for Siberia, the initial projection mentioned was around $10 billion just to get started.
These are truly massive undertakings. What was the strategic angle he pitched to the Chinese companies? Beyond just, there's lots of oil here.
Well, for Jiangsu Linyang, he framed it as a chance to become pioneers, leaders in completely new, unconventional energy markets, while also, helping Ukraine achieve energy independence and maybe reshaping Europe's energy map. A big picture view.
And for CNPC?
For CNPC, the pitch was more about cementing their global leadership. Successfully tapping these non-traditional granite reserves would really expand their resource portfolio and influence worldwide, playing to their existing strengths and ambitions.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. After this deep dive into granite oil potential in Ukraine and Siberia, what are the main takeaways for you?
I think first, the sheer scale of the potential resource is enormous in both places, but it's entirely dependent on whether this RALF1 technology actually works as claimed. That's the big unknown.
The technological gamble.
Absolutely. Second, we've seen how specific Philippine energy companies, particularly PNOC, EC, and maybe PXP Forum Energy, could feasibly play roles, but almost certainly only through partnerships with major Chinese players.
Partnership is key.
It seems unavoidable for them. And third, all of this is happening against a really complex geopolitical backdrop. You've got the war in Ukraine, sanctions, the delicate Philippines-China relationship. It's all deeply intertwined.
It really is a fascinating mix, isn't it? Technological ambition, huge economic stakes, and incredibly complicated international relations. The high-risk, high-reward element is crystal clear, and navigating the politics seems just as big a challenge as drilling into granite.
No doubt. And that really leads us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to mull over. In a world that's constantly searching for more energy, driving innovation, and dealing with shifting global power, what kind of truly unexpected partnerships might we see emerge next? And maybe more specifically, what role can smaller, strategically located countries like the Philippines realistically hope to play on this huge, constantly changing global energy stage?
Really interesting questions to ponder. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you a much clearer picture of this very complex and potentially game-changing situation. Thanks for joining us.